Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hi, it's Jessa, back for another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. I am so excited to be back again today. I come every week sharing ideas, information, inspiration, interviews, and stories, all because I think sex is really important. I want you to have the best possible relationship, an intimate relationship that you can have with your partner. And to that end, I try to find interesting people to talk to and share ideas and things that might help. That's what I'm doing. If you would like advance access to every episode, it only costs $2 a month on Patreon. I don't know if you've heard of that site, but it's a patronage site, sort of like NPR, where you can pledge a certain amount of money. So for $2 a month, you could get advanced access to every episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my book, Sex Without Stress. And for $10 a month, I host a quarterly sort of Q&A, get to know you online little chat. I'd love to have your support. It keeps me going and supports the program, and hopefully will keep me from ever dealing with advertising or sponsors. I'd love to save that from happening, if at all possible. So today's episode, I think, is really important. I mean, I'm always excited about every one, but this is a great interview. We are talking about sexual shame, and specifically religious sexual shame, but it doesn't matter if it's come from a conservative religious background or not. It's the same phenomenon. It has a huge impact on us and on our relationships and on our sex life. You know, we feel broken. We feel uncomfortable or unhappy in our bodies. We feel suspicious of our desires or totally out of touch with them. It affects our ability to communicate about sex, about what we want and how it goes. It creates sexual dysfunction sometimes. I mean, it's a huge burden that we carry. And what you're going to find out is it's for absolutely no reason. There is a way forward to heal if you struggle with sexual shame, whether it's religiously based or not. And importantly, there are ways to change our legacy, to change the way we're parenting and talking and dealing with sex with our children so that this could end in a generation. I mean, that's the vision, right? My guest today is Tina Shermer-Sellers, who is a distinguished marriage and family therapist, a medical family therapist, a certified sex therapist through ASECT, a professor, researcher, author, and speaker. I mean, she's done it all. She has been teaching for almost 30 years at a university and really dedicated to positive sexuality in the world and making a real difference. And she's the author of a relatively new book now called Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, an amazing resource. And she's going to share a lot of the ideas in this book with you now. And like I said, it doesn't even matter if your shame has come from a religious source. This book would be useful to you. I hope you enjoy the conversation. I would love to hear comments and questions if you have them once you've heard the show. Keep in touch. Thanks. So Tina, thank you so much for being with me today.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I think this is a really important topic. It comes up in my practice a lot. So it's really an honor to have you here to speak.
Thanks.
So tell me a little bit just about how you came to write this book, how long you've been working on it. You know, is this your story?
Yeah, that's a great question. People ask me that a lot, and it's actually not my story.
Okay.
I had the good fortune, I think anyway, of growing up in a Swedish immigrant home. And many Swedes and European families in general tend to be pretty body positive and sex positive. So I grew up with sexuality talked about by my grandparents, by my aunts and uncles and great aunts and great uncles. And it was kind of everyday conversation,
Okay.
kind of woven into everything from being little all the way up. So I kind of thought every family was like that because it was just a part of normal conversation. I didn't really think other families were very different. So there wasn't a talk. It just happened all the time.
Right.
And so if I had a question, I asked it. If there were, people were talking amongst themselves, I learned about things. And I started teaching at Seattle Pacific University shortly after grad school myself. And one of the courses I've always taught here, I've been teaching here now 28 years, is the human sexuality course for therapists. It's a required course for licensure.
Okay.
And I have my students write their sexual autobiography in that course. And when people hear that, they're often like, why? Because they think, oh my gosh, I can never imagine, committing my sexual story to paper. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, But, when you're training therapists, you actually want your therapist to know what all of their many stories are, or at least many of their stories. And your sexual story is actually one you want your therapist to be very clear about, because probably about 90% of people grow up in homes that are silent or silent and shaming.
Right.
And so our story isn't a cohesive narrative. It is remembering just certain events. Like I remember getting in trouble for playing doctor, or I remember my first kiss, or I remember this thing, this event, but it's not a cohesive narrative. So when I give students 60 or 70 questions just to jog their memory, and then walk them through questions from their families of origin and through their childhood and adolescence and adulthood, and ask them to actually write it, then they see it as a legacy narrative. And they get to see, what are the trends here? And
Right.
how do I think about my legacy? Is this the legacy that I want to pass forward?
Yeah.
And so they get clear about where they begin and end, and where their clients begin and end. And that's very important for your therapist to know. And it is in many of the stories in their lives.
Right.
So I've read well over 500 of these in my career. And right around the year 2000, I started to notice a significant difference in the tone and sort of shape of how these stories were beginning to change. There was a dramatic increase in the shame of these stories, although what they were describing as far as what they had experienced and what they had felt and what they had desired had not changed.
Oh, that's interesting.
I couldn't figure out why. Like the amount of disgust they had towards themselves and how they felt about themselves, the kind of humiliation they felt about themselves, the way they thought of themselves as perverted had dramatically changed. And that continued on for the next year, 2001, 2002, 2003. And I couldn't figure out why they were feeling so horribly about themselves when what they were describing was what every other class before had ever described. They were so much more naive about what was normal developmental desires, thoughts, feelings, actions. So I began to ask more questions, like, tell me more about, like, what did you learn, about sexuality, and what experiences did you have? And what I eventually figured out was I was getting the first wave of kids who had experienced the abstinence-only sex, quote-unquote, education program that was beginning to be rolled out in the early mid-'80s.
Okay.
And also the first wave of kids who, if they had grown up in conservative religious homes, were getting what was later called the purity movement from the evangelical conservative church. So if you know anything about your political history, there was a merging of church and state that happened in the 80s with the moral majority and the religious right. And that was the rollout of the abstinence-only education program in the public schools, but it also was the purity movement in the evangelical church that rolled out at the same time. So we had these purity rings that were being put on, these pledges that were being taken. We had one thing that happened in the early 90s where there were cards that were put in the Capitol Mall, like millions of cards laid out in the Capitol Mall and kids taking pledges. There were well over like 3 million kids that took these pledges saying that they would remain morally pure until the day of biblical marriage. So it was this whole sort of movement that swept the country. And books came out like by Josh Harris that called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And so it was this just gigantic movement that happened. But I didn't know about it because of my age and the age of my own children. I didn't have any idea about it. So that's what I was seeing.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's surprising to hear that that's so recent. I mean, I knew the abstinence-only sex ed was relatively recent, but I would have thought the conservative church teachings that would have been consistent all along.
No, so actually, this is what's funny. So I had my own upbringing, which was very open and fairly loving and goofy. I like to think about it, because I just had all these conversations. But I grew up here in Seattle. And then in the so I'm 58. So for those people, those in your audience who might be more my age, might remember that in the early 70s, Boeing had a big layoff. And we had billboards that were running along I-5 that said, the last one out, turn off the lights. Because Boeing had such a huge effect on our economy.
Yeah.
Well, my dad actually worked for a subsidiary of the Boeing company, and he ended up getting laid off because he worked for a company, that was related. And we took a job in Southern California, or he did. And so we moved down there. Well, I was a competitive figure skater, and I ended up getting involved in what was called down there the Jesus movement. Now, the Jesus movement was a spinoff of sort of this radical kind of concerts and saving people from LSD. And it was, kind of off the hippie movement, all about love and, just kind of taking care of everybody. So those people that were a part of sort of mainline churches kind of thought that these were kind of Jesus hippies, I guess you would call them, and that they were a little crazy. And so that was my introduction into quote unquote church. And it was super fun because you went to concerts on Saturday night and there were just a lot of fun people there. Half of them or more were high, and there's great music. So that was sort of my introduction to quote unquote church. And it wasn't at all legalistic. And so when the church, I'm putting this in air quotes, became legalistic in the mid-'80s, by that point, I had gotten married. I had my first child in 86. And then I watched the church get weird, get really legalistic. And I actually didn't want to be a part of that development of the church. I sort of hung out on the edges of it and thought, well, I'll never get really like that because that's just not who I am as a person. I'm pretty much about love and justice. And so that's kind of what I always liked about Jesus anyway. He was kind of a radical that way. So I didn't know the whole purity thing happened because it just wouldn't have been anything I would have ever gotten involved in.
Right.
So it really took me by storm too when I learned that this is what the kids experienced.
Why did this happen then? Like, I mean,
it was a socio. I know I think it's what we're all still doing.
Yeah.
Why did this happen? We're all still doing that, I think. So it was a socio-political movement. It happened because actually it happened when we peel the sheets back almost always. Underneath it is a socio-political movement that has to do with money and power.
Yeah.
And you can trace that back and you will find the church in the middle of it always. And in the research that I did for my book, I traced back the church history, asking the question around how the church has managed sexuality. And you will find money and power, socio-political movements, all there all along. And that doesn't mean that there aren't good people doing good things.
Right.
There always are good people doing good things. But when it has to do with power and control, the church has always had a problem with it, just like government has always had a problem with it.
Yeah.
And that is a huge part of this problem with this issue of shame.
Okay, so somehow shame and purity and these messages became an instrument of money and power.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
And we see the fallout of it still with how so many of the evangelicals have been in support of Trump even to this day.
Yeah.
Right. It's still happening.
Right. And can you speak do you have anything to say about different churches or different denominations or different religions? I mean, are you talking specifically about evangelical Christians only, or is this, across a spectrum of religion and church?
Well, I think when you get into the more conservative and more legalistic kinds of churches that are very black and white in their thinking, a lot of times you have to look underneath and say, what's being supported here and who's being supported and for what purposes?
Mm-hmm.
And then as you do, you sort of have to look at who's winning and who's losing, who's being hurt here. So I'm always looking at, where do you see love and where do you see justice? And then if you're not seeing love and justice, then often there are people in power that are benefiting.
Right.
Right. Right. So, in this case, what I noticed is that we had so many people that were being hurt by sexual shame.
Yeah.
And I do believe that there were many, many, many lovely families that were trying to protect their children by supporting the purity movement. They were really afraid that their children were going to get hurt by sexuality.
Yeah.
And so really tried to help them. But by keeping them from learning about sexuality, keeping them from dating, so keeping their ignorance very, very high, and then shaming them from any curiosity that they might have, what they actually did is put them in a place of real danger when they did end up becoming sexual. So they ended up not understanding anything about sexuality and then believing that all their thoughts and all their feelings and then later all their actions actually made them unworthy of love and belonging, made them bad, separated them from God, made God not desire them, made them unworthy of God's love, and made them unworthy of somebody else's love.
What a burden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually I'll tell you something really interesting. We had a student here at SPU who did her doctoral dissertation on sexual shame. We actually did not have an operational definition of sexual shame until just a little over a year ago. And so she did phenomenological research and interviewed several people. None of them, actually maybe one, was religious in her background. So just general how sexual shame shows up in people's lives. Her definition is stunning. And I know it's what most therapists see in their offices. The definition is sexual shame is a visceral feeling of humiliation and disgust toward one's own body and identity as a sexual being, and a belief of being abnormal, inferior, and unworthy. This feeling can be internalized, but it also manifests in interpersonal relationships, having a negative impact on trust, communication, and physical and emotional intimacy.
Yeah.
Sexual shame develops across the lifespan in interactions with interpersonal relationships, one's culture and society, and subsequent critical self-appraisal, which means that it's a constant feedback loop, right? It happens it first starts between you and somebody else. The minute you find that happy place between your legs, you are pre-verbal.
Yeah.
You aren't even talking yet, and somebody smacks your hand away. That's the beginning of you thinking something's wrong with you. It happens hundreds of times.
Right.
And then you cement this internal dialogue that something is wrong with you, right? It goes on to say, there is also a fear and uncertainty related to one's power or right to make decisions including safety decisions related to sexual encounters, along with an internalized judgment towards one's own sexual desire.
Wow.
And this is what we saw in Peggy Orenstein's research when she saw that girls can feel powerful in every single area of their life until they get ready to go out. And then they'll put down 3, 4, or 5 shots because they don't know they can keep themselves safe or that they have the right to keep themselves safe. And so this is rampant across our society, that people do not feel that they feel okay about themselves. So they cannot attach well at all, give or receive love. So we are hurting people at their most sacred place, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there was so much in what you just said. My head is sort of spinning, the feelings of brokenness and self-doubt and the vilification of our own desires, and then the lack of sense of empowerment or trust of our own gut and intuition, and then affecting your ability to communicate. I mean, I'm not even saying everything you just said, but it's like, this is huge.
Right. Exactly. And it starts so young.
Yeah.
It starts so young. So this is where I think not providing comprehensive sex education and not making natural curiosity about our sexuality and our desires and all that a normal, good part of life is hurting people so profoundly.
Yeah.
And we have no idea of what we're doing.
Yeah.
How much we're hurting people.
Could you speak to that for a minute? Comprehensive sex ed, because I'm thinking it's not enough to just have like the sex ed I had in public school, which was, all about anatomy and reproduction and not getting STDs. And at least that's what they were called then. I wouldn't consider that comprehensive, right? Like that's what I think a lot of people would think. We're just learning about anatomy and sexual functioning. Right. But I have a feeling that when you say comprehensive sex ed, you're talking about something even more than that.
Right. I am. So in Sweden, they started in 1945. It was actually started by a physician. She's the one that challenged the church. So the church is a state-run church there. And the church had said, no, same thing. And she started a movement with the people saying we need life education. They called it life education because it was all woven together. You will learn about, we can have careers. It doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl, and maternal and paternal leave, and then we'll learn about sexuality and life and chores. And so it's all kind of taught together. And it starts in kindergarten and it runs all the way through. And they actually have family life educators that'll come to your home if you need help learning this. And so it starts super young, and it's every single year, and it's age appropriate, unfolds. Yeah. So what I'm talking about, and so it's a part of life, right? All the way a part of life. So you as a parent become competent in knowing developmentally what happens every year. And so you learn that the 1-year-old or 2-year-old is interested in how their body looks. Yeah. They're going to want to know. They're going to say, oh my gosh, they're in the bathtub and they're playing. Look, the little boy is playing with his toys on his belly and he's going back and forth, and he notices that his penis gets large and he screams, mommy, come here, look how big my penis is. Is it going to stay this big? And mommy doesn't freak out because she knows, or daddy, that that's what's going to happen. And they're able to say, oh, look at that. No, it's not. In fact, probably when you're not on your tummy anymore, it's going to go back to its normal size. And she goes back into the kitchen, or he goes back into the kitchen and keeps making dinner. Yeah. Right? The 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 6-year-olds that are playing, and parent walks in and pants are down and they're poking at each other, right? Because that's what they do. They notice that they're different. They're like, yep, you guys are different. Pull up your pants. Go back to playing. Nobody has a heart attack. Yeah. Right? Because they know this is what they do. They're noticing that everything in the world is different. That's what they do. Noses are different. Ears are different. Eyes are different. Penis and vulvas are different. Right. Yep. They're all different. Nobody's having heart failure. Yeah. Right. Bodies are changing. Boys are noticing about masturbation at 10, 11, 12. Girls are noticing that they're getting breast buds 10, 11, 12. These are all natural things that are happening. parents know the developmental tasks that are happening. They're talking about it when they're going to well child visits with the pediatrician. Now, in America, when you go to well child visits, because physicians don't learn about sexual development, they learn about all the other ones, you don't get told by your pediatrician what's coming up sexually.
Yeah.
You get told about everything else. So it comes as a surprise to the parents because they also grew up in a silent home. And so then when it happens, they freak out.
Right. It's systemic, right? You're talking about culturally systemic. Yeah.
Yes. It's a systemic problem. And yet we're told all the other things. Oh, your child is probably going to start walking between 10 months and 14 months.
Yeah.
Right? But guess what else they're going to do between 10 months and 14 months? They're going to find their genitals and they're going to think, wow, there's a lot of nerves in here. And this is really awesome. Yeah, it's really awesome. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that we keep all this stuff secret is ridiculous for everyone.
So was there a moment where this became your focus and mission? I mean, I guess this has evolved over time.
That point when my heart broke.
Yeah.
It wasn't my mission before because I just grew up in a home that was like the home I kind of described when people were like, yeah, Tina, this is what's going on with your body. Yeah, Tina, this is what's going on. I remember this is just to give you an idea of what it was like. I was going out on a date when I was probably 16. When I think I was dating the high school quarterback or something silly, And my dad said, as I was walking out the door, he says, you know what a guy means, right? When he says he wants to touch your pec. And I laughed at my dad and I said, of course I know what he means. And I walk out the door. Yeah. That was my home.
Right.
I mean, it was open conversation. It was a part of life. I called it a soundbite sex home. We had sound bites that were constantly going on. Well, research shows that if you have 100 1-minute conversations with your children, actually ought to be 1,000 1-minute conversation, your children will actually get involved with sex later, make safer sexual choices, and as they grow up in their adult life, they will have more varied and satisfying sexual lives. But we don't help parents know how to do that.
Yeah.
And we don't help them recover from the shame of their own childhoods.
Right.
So they can do that.
Hey, I'm just taking a quick little break in the middle of the show. Most of you probably know, if you've been listening at all, that I have written a new book called Sex Without Stress. But what you may not know is that I have developed an online course to support you through the process. The book has a lot in it. It's a do-it-yourself process to totally transform your sex life, but it's hard to do it. And it's hard to do it alone without support. So I have been looking for a way to create an environment that's supportive and could help you actually get the stuff done. So what I've done is create an 8-week course. There are webinars that you can watch live or you can watch later. There's materials, there are exercises and directions, and then I'm going to offer live online office hours. This is where you can get questions answered and get input on your situation. It's not therapy, but it's a place to come and help you move through the process. The next cohort starts January 28th, 2019. Taking enrollment all the way up until then. You can learn more at sexwithoutstress.com. Easy to find the online course information there if you want some more information. I would love to have you join me. What you read from that thesis, I think said a lot, but would you sort of list/summarize how does this show up for people? Like if we've got the listeners, probably a lot of people understand they have sexual shame, but how does it manifest? What's sort of an overview of what people might struggle with in their adult relationships or adult lives at this point?
Well, I think a lot of it is they feel badly about their bodies. They feel like they can't communicate about what they want. They don't know what they want for themselves.
Right.
They're afraid they're going to hurt their children as far as how they raise them sexually. They don't know what to do, and they're afraid. They don't want to do what was done to them, but they don't know what to do for them.
Okay.
And so they find themselves avoiding it. They're scared about the digital age and what's happening out there, but they don't know what to do. And they just find themselves feeling really kind of closed down about it all. It all kind of just scares them.
Yeah.
And they feel reactive and then just kind of scared about it all.
Right.
Really,
and I have to imagine this would have a big impact on sexual dysfunctions.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. There could be a lot of sexual dysfunction for people that are bringing in shame.
Yes. Yeah. Right? Absolutely. And so I think one of the most common ways we see it is we see low sexual desire.
Yeah.
People find they don't like sex the way they don't like sex, or they don't like the kind of sex that they're having, or they find themselves blaming their partner or blaming themselves.
Yeah.
Right. Or what is wrong with me? And many times they don't know what is pleasurable.
Yeah.
Or can I have pleasure? Or
is it okay to have pleasure?
Is it okay to have pleasure? Exactly. Yeah. Or maybe I just can't have pleasure. Well, we've actually probably never made space for you to discover what pleasure is for you.
Right.
We've constructed a world where you're working all the time and you're working for everyone else. And we've not even created a space to let it be okay for you to discover pleasure for you. There's just so much, I think, that's wrong with this. I put in my book a whole model for erasing sexual shame, for healing sexual shame, to help walk people through how to actually heal. And then I put in there actual practices that you can do to slowly integrate how to touch, how to actually use touch slowly and sequentially to begin to know how to bring healing touch into your life. Because just because you can kind of know what to do doesn't mean you know how to do it with touch too.
Right, right.
Because it's like, well, I don't know how to do the touch thing,
Can you give us just an overview? I mean, obviously people should get your book, right? But can you give a little overview of what that process entails to heal and recover?
Yeah. So the model I call cleaning up the mess. And mess is the model for erasing sexual shame.
Okay.
And the model is frame, name, claim, and aim. And frame is building yourself a frame or a scaffolding of sex education. So the first piece is most of the sort of foundation of our problem is that if you grew up in a home that was silent or silent and shaming, primarily, you got your quote unquote education from media or media and pornography. Well, pornography is fantasy.
Right.
And it's fantasy that's often very bent. If you're heterosexual, it's bent towards the male fantasy. And that fantasy doesn't serve women at all. And women often were bent towards the male fantasy too. So they don't know what maybe they want.
Right.
And so it really needs to be constructed in a way that's built on reality and built on what makes sense. And so you need to construct your own sex education. And so like I have on the Northwest Institute on Intimacy on our website, resources, and you probably do have them too.
Right.
Like resources so you get some sex education and know your body and know how magnificent it is and what actually it can do and how to actually access it and get rid of those myths that are out there that are not serving you. So that's the frame. Get your scaffolding of sex education. Name is tell your story. Find a therapist, find friends that are empathic, compassionate. Tell what it was like to grow up in your home around silence and shame.
Yeah.
Whether it's other women, if you're a woman, men, if you're other men, if you're a man, or a couples group even. Talk about what it was like. Find out that you are not alone. We grew up in a pretty effed up culture.
Yeah.
And it's nice to know that you weren't alone. And I find that people just do really well. I'll often say, grab my book. If you did not grow up in a home that was touched by much religion, the name of the book can seem like it won't fit you because it's Sex, God, and the Conservative Church Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, but you'll be surprised how much America was affected by religion.
Yeah, because the shame is transcendent, right? It doesn't mean you had to have come from a conservative home. Yeah.
And we ought to have that screaming at us by now when we turn on the TV.
Right.
So grab the book, grab a bunch of friends and read it together and just talk through how much your story has been affected so that you find out you're not alone. So that's name.
That also sounds like the narrative you've been having your students do. Yes. Instead of just these isolated memories, let's tie this together into a narrative.
Exactly. And that is so healing to tell your story. Yeah. It always is healing to tell your story. Okay. Claim your body. Do you know that we have 6-year-olds? That's the average age that girls are putting themselves on diets. Claim your body as something beautiful, amazing. If you are still breathing and you are not in immense pain all the time, it is a good day.
Yeah.
It is a good day, and you have a good body to love with, to write your story with, to hug with. Go out and claim it. And I can't stand the fact that we get told 3,000 advertisements a day that we are not good enough simply to drive our economy,
right,
and make other people rich. We have a good body, and I'm of Swedish stock, and I run an average 40 pounds overweight, and it is a good body on any day.
Yeah.
So claim your body. That's claim. So frame, name, and claim. And if we work hard to do those things, what we are actually doing is aim, which is we are aiming for a new legacy. And we can change our legacy in one generation so that we don't ever have to do this again.
Yeah.
And I have watched my students change their legacy in one generation. And I've been doing this so long that I've watched them pass a new legacy on to their children. Wow. And it is so fun and so exciting to see them doing new things with their kids or their nieces and nephews. And I'm like, damn, you go, because we can change this thing.
So that raises my next question is this, if people are out there listening and they've got children, is it the same thing? They just go through that process and then they're going to be prepared to parent their children that way?
Well, at the beginning, yes, because we've got some really good books out there for parents. And so what you want to do, like I said, 100 1-minute conversations. So there's books by Robbie Harris, ROBIE HARRIS, and she's got books that start at age 4, and you just get those books, you have them around the house. They've got hilarious pictures, and you just start talking, and your kids are going to bring it up. They are talking. They are going to be finding things, and they're going to be telling you all about it. They're going to be saying things that are going to be embarrassing you. And if you know developmentally what's coming next, and you practice what you're going to do, and you breathe your way through it, understand that you are going to, because of the shame of your childhood, you're going to feel it. You're going to be like, oh, here it comes. Okay, They're going to walk in on us. They're going to find their penis or their vulva. They're going to be it's not masturbation, but it's a comfort behavior when they find their clitoris or they
right.
The comfort behavior, and they are going to, and that is fine. That is normal, and be ready for it and be like, yeah, okay, well, you know what? We go to the bathroom or we go to our room. That's where mommy and daddy go to. And that's just because it's a private behavior that, it's not a big deal.
So, but people are going to, it seems to me, they're going to really need to take on their own shame.
Yes.
And have healing around that before they're going to have the comfort to sit with their kids through these,
through
these
so
stages,
you have to breathe, to do a lot of breathing. And one of the expressions I got from a friend of mine is, you put on an excited face. Even though your insides are like, oh my gosh, you put on yes, you're right. There it is. Okay. You just put on that face.
But you're better to prepare for that. Like, it's not, people aren't going to be able to do that on the spot, right? In the moment. It's like, wait, I've got to be ready to put on an excited face. I've got to be ready maybe with some of these statements. I should be prepared ahead for what's going to come out.
Deborah Hafner, who's part of ASECT, which is the organization you and I belong to, she wrote a book called From Diapers to Dating, which is a book I love because she breaks down all the ages, and then she has actual scenarios
Okay.
Back of it. Yeah. And the book I'm working on now actually is going to have all of the ages, and then it's going to have what the kids do, how it triggers our shame, what we need to deal with our shame, and then what your kids need. Because
Yeah.
I know that parents, we have to deal with our shame.
Right. So what are the biggest challenges facing people now? I mean, like this all you said rolled out in the 80s. Are we at new levels of complexity with this stuff? Or are we just still stuck in the same mud? What?
Well, I think that we're still dealing with it, obviously, in lots of ways. We haven't rolled out comprehensive sex education in any way. We have a lot of people that are attempting to heal from the abstinence-only and purity movements. We have a lot of people who have left. We have more people leaving the conservative evangelical churches than we've ever seen before. And many of those are creating progressive, open, and affirming gathering spaces for themselves, which is quite lovely. And they're asking for help as to how to talk to their kids and talk to each other and have just and loving spaces. So I think we're going to be constructing a lot of things that are really good and new, but it's going to take a long time because we are such a divided country in so many ways.
Right. Right.
So we got a long way to go. There's a lot of, I think, wonderful intersectionality things that are happening now, but we've got so much rebuilding to do.
Yeah. And this is not a question you knew was going to come, but this is what's occurring to me right now. Do you have anything to say to people about the history, or how do I want to phrase this? If people have believed that sexuality is sinful or bad in the eyes of God, how do you counteract that message? I mean, the history of the way religion and God is viewed sex. Like, how do we shift it into a glorious thing in their mind and realize?
I actually love that question because I did ask that question when I was writing the book. So the integration of sexuality and spirituality, the Eastern faith religions like Hindu and Buddhism have Tantra, forms of Tantra, that they have wonderful practices that have ancient traditions that are thousands of years old. And so I asked the question, did Christianity ever have a sex positive view? And I traced the history. It never did. It grew out of the mind-body split, which was around 300 BC, which was when the philosophers, Aristotle and Plato, they were the first ones to split the mind from the body.
Okay.
And that was 300 years before Jesus. Okay. So the culture was already had a mind-body split in place. And then Jesus came along. Jesus was very pro-women, pro-Gentile. So he was a Jew.
Yeah.
But he made his message pro-everybody, pro-women, pro-disabled, pretty much pro-everyone.
Yeah.
Right? That's one of the things that made him so radical, is that he stood up for abuses of power and whatever. That's what got him killed. But no sexual ethic developed out of his ministry.
Right.
So as we followed it forward, what we noticed happened about the 4th century when Constantine was the emperor, he became a Christian. So we have this new church that was trying to form. People were being persecuted, had been persecuted for, at that point, more than 300 years. He's in power. He becomes a Christian. He has the power to appoint now who are going to be the leaders, the bishops, if you will, of the church. He, of course, appoints men. They are vying for power through denying the body.
Okay, so from the very roots of this, it's been about power and control.
Right. The denial of the body. From the mind-body split, the denial that the body is bad, the spirit is good. So we have the mind-body split. Now the body is bad, the spirit and the mind are good. And from there we develop the sexual ethic of the Christians. And when they cannot do it, when the bishops cannot do it, like Augustine, all of them, who do they blame? The women.
Yeah.
And that is in place to this day. to this very day in secular culture and religious culture, if a woman is assaulted, what was she wearing?
Right.
Was she drinking? And it's not we all have responsibility to be disciplined.
Right.
It is, what was the woman doing?
Yeah.
Now, so with that question, I said, okay, so the Christians in Christianity never developed a sex positive sexual ethic out of Jesus' ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So then I asked the next question. On the Abrahamic line, was there ever a sex positive sexual ethic? So I kept going. And the reason I did that is I serve a lot of people who are Christians.
Yeah.
Or are on the Abrahamic line, have a Jewish history. So I kept going because I wasn't satisfied with just being able to only hand them something from the Eastern philosophies.
Yeah.
So I got so far deep into Jewish history and Jewish mystic history. I was so deep. I was way over my head. But I'll tell you, I found some amazing stories that were so beautiful. And then I just went to all my Hebrew scholars friends that I knew, and I just checked everything out. And I have a whole section of the book that is filled with things that will blow your mind. They are so beautiful. And I came away thinking, we have, if this is your line, if you believe on the Abrahamic line in a monotheistic God, in a Yahweh God, then you will be convinced that you have an erotic God who is relentlessly loves you and wants you to feel God's love through your sexuality and through your body. You will be convinced. And I will tell you one thing before we're done. One of the things, and there are many, but one of the things I found was a thing called the vow of Ona. And it is 8 principles, 8 guidelines. All of them are sex positive. They are still taught today in Jewish boys' schools.
Yeah.
Most of them are from this vow. A couple of them are from fertility guidelines. You can run your partnership by them. You can run your dating life by them. You can raise your children by them. They cover consent. They cover respect, justice, and love. And when I found them, I tell you, I thought, oh my goodness, why have I never heard these?
Yeah.
They're incredible. I'll read them to you.
Yeah, I guess what you're saying is that this is a legacy for Christians too, right? Jesus was a Jew, so this is something that's been left out. So it's not like a Christian today has to somehow
never brought forward,
right? Doesn't have to break with their faith, or the religion to embrace sexuality. It's like this is your birthright.
This is what should have been brought forward.
Yeah,
this is Paul. St. Paul could have brought these forward too, but they left out.
Right.
There are millions of things that were left out. There were millions of stories that were left out.
Yeah.
You know, the Bible was written by men.
Yeah.
There are millions of stories that were left out. So here's the vow of Ona.
Okay.
First one, all forms of sexual touch are to be recognized and valued. Next one, the purpose of all sexual touch is to reinforce the loving bond over the lifespan. The idea that the elderly were not being sexual was a completely foreign concept in the Torah. The next one, sex is considered a woman's right, not a man's. The husband has a duty, the vow of Ona, to ensure that all forms of sexual touch are pleasurable for her. They are to bring her pleasure and joy. He is to study her and to learn her. Now, this is not only counter-Western, it's countercultural.
Yeah.
But here is what I think is most magnificent about it. The way we do it in the West, it's all focused on the man. But when we do it that way, we have to then wait until men are in their 50s and sometimes 60s before he realizes what grounds all his hard work in his career is actually his relationships. Because that's when he goes, oh, it's my relationships that make everything make sense. Right? That's when he's often on his second family. He's missing his kids, right?
Yeah.
Women, we have to wait till she's often in her 40s or 50s before she realizes what makes things make sense for her. It's her finding her voice.
Yeah.
It's her going, wait a minute, I'm tired of giving it all away. I have a purpose here in the world.
Yeah.
It matters how I'm treated. Now imagine that we raised our boys to pay attention to his growing edge sooner. Start paying attention to other. Learn to read other. What does the other's life tell you? And we get him growing that part of himself from a young boy. Now imagine we get her paying attention to how she's being treated early on in her life.
Yeah.
And what her voice is and what her purpose in the world is early on. Now we have half a chance that in their early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, they could get an egalitarian relationship.
Yeah. And not have to start from scratch at 40, 50, or 60 years old.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is thousands of years old, and the Jews knew it.
Yeah.
Next one. Sex is to be celebrated in joy, not in sadness, anger, disinterest, self-interest, or when chemically influenced. Sex for selfish or personal satisfaction without regard for the partner's pleasure is considered wrong and evil. And the word evil is rarely used in the Torah.
Yeah.
A man is never to force or coerce his partner to be sexual through emotional or physical tactics.
Wow.
And that is specifically a man. It's not a woman. It's specifically to the man. It's because of the size difference.
Right.
Sex is not to be used as a weapon against a spouse, either by depriving sex or compelling sex. It is considered a serious offense to use sex in any way to manipulate or punish your partner.
Wow.
Sexual enjoyment is recommended also at times when procreation is impossible, contraception or during pregnancy, or where behaviors cannot result in pregnancy. And the last one, all forms of sexual touch are permissible as long as they're desired by both partners.
Wow. I have never heard those. Thank you for sharing those.
I know, most people haven't.
Yeah. I'd love to actually include those in the show notes if you've got a link or document or something.
They're in the book.
Yeah.
They're right there. And, when I found them, I literally, so many of the things I found, I had to go find them in other sources before I would even tell anybody because I couldn't believe what I was finding.
Right.
They were so beautiful and so supportive of sexuality. And I thought, oh my gosh, what people have been told is so not the God that I think we've always had.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing all this. Obviously it's the tip of the iceberg and people all need to go get your book, but I really appreciate your time.
Oh yeah, it's been a joy. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.